He dropped his bags. He dropped his passport. He ran as if the devil himself was chasing him. But on the cameras behind him, no one. What made an absolutely healthy guy climb over a barbed wire fence and erase himself from the face of the earth forever? You are on the Raccoon Archives channel, and today we are going to look into a real hell. Let's go. Have you ever wondered how fragile and illusory that invisible wall is, which separates our calm, measured, protected everyday life from an uncontrollable primal nightmare, where any laws of logic and common sense instantly stop working, and the line between a safe, sunny resort and a deadly, paralyzing trap is erased in just one short moment? We, the inhabitants of the 21st century, are used to sacredly and naively believing that our mind is an indestructible, reinforced concrete fortress, that we always control our thoughts, our deepest fears, and our actions, especially in those moments when we are on a long-awaited vacation, surrounded by hundreds of the same carefree tourists, under the bright, warming summer sun, in conditions where, it would seem, nothing truly bad or irreparable could happen to us. But this creepy story, which we will analyze in extreme detail today from a medical, deeply psychological, and strict forensic point of view, cruelly, ruthlessly, and categorically proves us wrong, clearly showing how just one tiny, seemingly insignificant physiological breakdown in the body, multiplied by a fatal confluence of circumstances and the specific chemical effect of the most ordinary pharmacy drugs, is capable of turning a completely healthy, crystal clear, and cheerful young man into a hunted, crazed victim, running from invisible demons straight into a gaping, unknown void in a matter of days. Summer of 2014, the coast of the warm Black Sea, the famous Bulgarian resort, Golden Sands, which every summer magically turns into a real pulsating mecca for tens of thousands of young Europeans thirsty for cheap, accessible alcohol, noisy round-the-clock parties, and intoxicating freedom from gray working days. It is exactly here, into this atmosphere of eternal holiday, at the end of June, that a group of young guys from Germany arrives, among whom is 28-year-old Lars Mittank, a man whose psychological profile and social status do not fit into the typical, stereotypical image of a problem tourist, an inveterate brawler, or a seeker of dangerous adventures. And this fact is critically, fundamentally important to understand for our entire subsequent detective investigation. Lars was a stark contrast to any marginal. He had a stable job in a very prestigious and responsible position at a large power plant in his native German city of Itzehoe. He was distinguished by incredible pedantry, adult responsibility, complete financial independence, had very strong, warm relationships with his family, especially with his mother Sandra, whom he caringly called practically every single day. And, what is the most important argument in this story, his thick medical record contained not a single, even the slightest mention of any psychiatric diagnoses, hidden depressions, sudden panic attacks, bouts of paranoia, or even more a tendency to use prohibited, mind-altering narcotic substances. To all his acquaintances, he was that benchmark good guy, a predictable, reliable friend you could always, in any situation, count on with absolute certainty. This Bulgarian trip was planned exclusively as an ordinary, non-binding male emotional release, a classic week of carefree, lazy beach vacation before the inevitable return to the harsh, disciplined German working days and the first few days went exactly as they should have, according to the perfect scenario. Hot sand, salty sea, noisy bars, sincere laughter, and not even the most ghostly harbingers of an impending, inevitable catastrophe. But this sweet illusion of total safety collapsed with a crash on the night of July 6th, when Lars and his friends were hanging out in one of the many local sports bars. And the trigger, the root cause of this massive catastrophe, was the most banal, ridiculous, stupid, and meaningless thing in the whole world: an aggressive verbal altercation over club football. The reason why adult, educated, adequate men get involved in such conflicts lies in the highly specific pack psychology of sports fanaticism, which, being generously fueled by cheap, low-quality resort alcohol, artificially inflates the male ego to incredible sizes and ruthlessly turns off the inhibition centers in the frontal lobes of the brain, which in a normal state are responsible for a rational, sober assessment of potential risks. Lars was a long-time devoted fan of the Bremen football club Werder, and at the neighboring closely pushed table, there accidentally happened to be a group of other very aggressively and belligerently minded German tourists who fiercely supported Bayern Munich. Word for word, a thrown glance, a caustic mockery, and the degree of animal tension in the bar began to grow rapidly. And although Lars's prudent friends tried to smooth out this uncomfortable situation as quickly as possible, pay the bill, and lead him away from this establishment, away from problems, the flywheel of the conflict had already been irreversibly launched. When they finally went out into the stuffy night street, Lars fell behind his main company for some miserable, fatal second to quickly drop into a small, brightly lit 24-hour fast food shop for food. And it was in this short, critical period of time, finding himself completely alone, without the physical and moral protection of his friends, that he collided head-on either with those same Bayern fans from the bar, or, according to another, more realistic investigative version, with local, tough Bulgarian guys hired by them, who for a modest fee decided to physically teach a lesson to the insolent, intractable foreign fan. He was not dealt heavy, life-incompatible injuries. He was not beaten half to death in a dark alleyway. He was not robbed. It was a very short, humiliating scuffle, as a result of which he received only one, but an extremely unfortunate, accentuated strong blow to the head, specifically to the sensitive area of the left ear. And this is exactly where we come close to the first most important medical and physiological aspect of this tangled tragedy. This blunt blow led to an immediate rupture of the thinnest eardrum, an injury that in itself, under normal earthly conditions, is not fatal or critically dangerous, but it inevitably causes acute, pulsating, exhausting pain, partial, frightening hearing loss, and, most dangerously, a serious disruption of the normal functioning of the vestibular apparatus, a complex mechanism located deep in the inner ear and directly responsible for the correct orientation of the physical body in three-dimensional space, which already in itself, on a purely biological level, causes any injured person a permanent feeling of strong disorientation, dizziness, and a subconscious, gnawing anxiety. The next, heavy hangover morning, experiencing strong physical discomfort and ringing in his ears, Lars prudently turns for qualified help to a local on-duty Bulgarian doctor, who, having conducted a quick examination with an otoscope, makes an unambiguous diagnosis and delivers a strict, uncompromising medical verdict. Flying home on a passenger plane is categorically prohibited under the threat of the most severe complications. Doctors are always so adamant in such cases because of the inexorable, cruel physics of sharp drops in atmospheric pressure. During the steep climb and subsequent rapid descent of a multi-ton aircraft, the air pressure in the pressurized cabin inevitably and tangibly changes. And if a healthy, elastic eardrum easily and naturally compensates for this difference by passing air through the eustachian tube, a damaged, ruptured eardrum is physically unable to do so, which in the harsh conditions of a real flight at an altitude of 10,000 meters can guaranteed lead to unbearable, maddening, infernal pain, severe internal bleeding from the ear canals, and complete, irreversible hearing loss for the rest of his life. So the Bulgarian doctor was absolutely right from a professional point of view, imposing a strict ban on boarding the booked flight, which was scheduled for the next morning, July 7th. To reliably prevent the development of a potentially dangerous bacterial infection in the vulnerable middle ear, which in a hot climate could rapidly go further, straight into the membranes of the cerebral cortex. The attending physician writes Lars a prescription for a strong, modern, broad-spectrum antibiotic called Cefuroxime, prescribing a very heavy therapeutic dosage of 500 milligrams. And it is right here, in this small paper prescription, that the very insidious devil is in the details, which ordinary therapists so rarely talk about out loud. Any experienced pharmacologist or neurobiologist will confirm to you that powerful synthetic antibiotics of the cephalosporin class, in extremely rare, exceptional cases, 1 in tens of thousands of patients, are able to cross the natural blood-brain barrier, the very protective membrane that protects our brain from toxins in the blood, and cause the most severe, frightening neurological side effects, including acute, causeless anxiety, deep confusion of consciousness, realistic visual hallucinations, and a real, full-fledged paranoid delusion of persecution. Especially, and it is critically important to emphasize this, if the immune body is already strongly weakened by the acute stress from a fight, physical head trauma with the possible microconcussion, and highly likely, the residual amount of alcohol in the blood after a stormy night. A difficult, unforeseen logistical choice suddenly stood before Lars. His friends, according to tickets bought a long time ago, absolutely had to fly home to Germany on July 7th, as originally planned, and he, obeying the doctor's prescription, had to forcibly stay in Bulgaria for a few more long, agonizing days until the damaged membrane healed a little and the doctor gave official permission for a safe flight upon re-examination. Why didn't his loyal friends, perfectly seeing that their comrade was injured in a foreign country, return their tickets and stay with him out of solidarity? This is perhaps one of the most frequent, most angry questions that viewers and armchair detectives ask official investigators, emotionally accusing Lars's comrades of cowardice and cynical betrayal. But let's for a second discard emotions, turn on cold, cynical logic, and look at this whole situation exclusively through their eyes at that specific moment in time. On that very morning, Lars visually did not behave strangely, frighteningly, or inadequately. He was in a full, clear consciousness and calm. He himself, personally and persistently, insisted that they fly home without him, because each of them had strict work obligations, strict bosses and families at home, and his local ear injury seemed to all of them just a minor, annoying misunderstanding, a temporary technical hitch, because of which Lars would simply have to spend a little, rebook the old ticket, and calmly arrive on the next flight in a couple of days. None of them, nor Lars himself at that minute, could foresee even in the most terrible, surreal nightmare that this seemingly logical, routine adult decision would become an irrevocable, fatal step into the abyss. The friends packed their suitcases and flew away, forever leaving him alone in a noisy, foreign country, with a pulsating, injured head, a handful of powerful, brain chemistry-altering antibiotics in his pocket, and a rapidly, inevitably approaching, sticky feeling of total isolation. Since their comfortable room in an expensive, guarded hotel right on the coast had already been officially handed over to the receptionist, Lars urgently needed to find some inexpensive temporary accommodation for these forced days of agonizing waiting, and, guided purely by banal cost savings and practicality, he makes another logical decision for a thrifty German, but fatal in the long run. He packs his sports bag, leaves the safe, bright, police-patrolled tourist zone of Golden Sands, and moves to Varna, a large, bustling port city, where he rents a tiny room in a very cheap, dubious, and shabby hotel called Color, located in not the most prosperous, gloomy criminal area of the city, where at night a completely different, heavy, and oppressive atmosphere reigns, strikingly and frighteningly different from the carefree, neon-lit tourist beaches. And at the exact moment when the flimsy door of this cheap, damp-smelling hotel room closed behind his back with a dull click, when he was left totally alone in the deafening, ringing silence of foreign walls, face to face with his unceasing physical pain, the powerful, unpredictable chemistry of the swallowed pills, and the dark, unfamiliar city hiding a threat outside the murky window, the invisible clockwork of the coming catastrophe was finally set in motion, and there was no longer any way back to normal reality for him. And now, dear viewers, before we turn the page and move on to that blood-curdling, inexplicable, paranoid horror that began to happen to Lars Mittank that very same night, and which forever inscribed his name in the history of the most terrible disappearances, I want to interrupt my story and ask you one very important, sharp, and deeply personal question, the answer to which I ask you to write right now in the comments below this video. What would you personally do, discarding hypocrisy, if you were in the place of Lars's friends that morning? Would you spit on the expensive bought tickets, risk serious problems at your work, and stay on duty in a foreign country with your friend who, in fact, just has an earache after a fight? Or, believing his calm persuasions that he is absolutely fine, would you fly home with a clear conscience knowing that you have an adult, smart, fully independent 28-year-old man in front of you? Write your most honest, unedited thoughts. I personally read and analyze your every comment. Under the influence of this chemical cocktail in his head, Lars, left alone in complete isolation, begins calling his mother Sandra, and these calls, which are recorded in her phone book, represent a chronicle of rapidly progressing paranoia. What Lars whispered to his mother on the phone seems like nonsense at first glance, but if you put yourself in the shoes of a person in a state of psychosis, everything takes on a creepy, distorted logic. In his sick, pill-poisoned mind, those Bayern fans from the bar didn't just leave. They organized a real professional hunt for him, and now these 4 pursuers, a mystical number fixed by his sick mind, have already penetrated this cheap hotel. They are standing behind the door. They are eavesdropping. They are everywhere. The demand to block his cards also had its reason. His fear-distorted brain built a paranoid chain. His pursuers were not just hooligans, but part of some criminal Bulgarian gang that hunts for the money of rich German tourists, and if he didn't have access to money, he would become uninteresting to them. The gang would lose all criminal interest in him, and he would be able to save himself. That is, his crazy demands to his mother were, in essence, his only deeply mistaken attempt to survive in the reality he had invented. Sandra Mittank, being thousands of kilometers away, hearing this animal terror in the voice of her always calm son, was in complete despair. Understanding that the police would hardly believe the confused stories of a drunk tourist over the phone, she makes the only rational decision. She begs Lars, as soon as morning comes, to immediately grab all his things, go to the airport, and go straight to the office of the local airport doctor, Dr. Kostov. Directing him there, Sandra, like any caring mother, hoped that he would be examined by a qualified medical specialist, but this time not in a dirty city office, but within the walls of a state, sterile institution under video surveillance cameras, where, as she naively believed, in the presence of a doctor and the police, nothing could threaten her son, and Lars, always an obedient son, submitted to this advice. And so, dear viewers, comes the morning of July 8th, 2014, the day that forever inscribed the name of Lars Mittank in the history of the most terrifying disappearances. The CCTV cameras of the Varna Airport record Lars entering the terminal. He has a bag in his hands, a backpack on his shoulder. He looks tired, slightly disoriented, but what is a fundamentally important fact is that he does not look like a crazed drug addict or an aggressive psychopath, but rather looks very anxious. He goes straight to Dr. Kostov's office to get that very long-awaited medical clearance to fly, and in this small, fluorescent-lit office, the final act of this tragedy plays out. According to Dr. Kostov's testimony, Lars walked in, sat in a chair. The doctor began his usual routine examination of the damaged ear, but at some point, when Lars was most vulnerable, the door to the office suddenly opened with a sharp creak. It was an innocent person, a simple construction worker in an orange vest, who was doing renovations in an adjacent room of the terminal and just popped in to ask the doctor some everyday, work-related question. And it was this creak of the door, this mundane moment, that became the very fatal trigger that finally destroyed the fragile lock in Lars's head and let his inner demons out. In his paranoid world, where 4 killers are hunting him, this construction worker in an orange vest wasn't a construction worker. He was one of them. He was the very 4th one who had finally found him, cornered him, and this white coat of Dr. Kostov now seemed to Lars not a protection, but a part of a massive, sinister conspiracy. In his head, completely poisoned by psychosis, an animal, primal, instinctive program instantly triggered. Trap, trap, trap. He is a cornered victim who has been come for to be killed, and his only salvation is flight. That is exactly why, jumping up from the chair and muttering to Dr. Kostov, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." Lars Mittank runs out of the office. The CCTV cameras capture a scene that still sends shivers down the spine. A grown man, leaving behind all his belongings and his only ticket home, his passport, fleeing from an invisible executioner. Crazed with animal terror, he dashes at maximum sprint speed across the entire terminal, shoving the crowd aside, and flies out through the automatic glass doors straight onto the scorching street. And here, Many armchair detectives and critics reasonably have a completely logical, sharp question. How did the airport security allow him to escape so easily? The answer lies in the harsh, blood-written international job instructions of aviation security. Their main and priority task is to prevent weapons, explosives, or dangerous chemicals from being brought inside a crowded building at any cost. They are trained for years to reflexively block a threat trying to penetrate a crowd of defenseless passengers. But a guy running out in panic, flashing his heels, clearly frightened, without luggage, without a jacket, and without visible weapons, does not pose any terrorist danger to the airport. To the stern guards in those seconds, he simply looked like an inadequate tourist hopelessly late for a bus, having forgotten something important in a taxi, or simply having had too much to drink, which is why in those precious, decisive first seconds, no one even tried to block his way or raise a general alarm. Running out onto the parking lot asphalt drenched in the scorching July sun, Lars did not run along the wide, smooth, and open access road, as any logically thinking person trying to escape would do. Instinctively, like a wild beast cornered by a pack of predators, he chose the most physically difficult, the most illogical, but from the point of view of his inflamed, screaming paranoia, the safest route. He rushed straight to the tall, 2.5-meter metal mesh fence of the airport, topped with dangerous, sharp coils of barbed wire. The decision to clamber over a serious physical obstacle instead of a free detour is explained by the fact that in a state of the most severe acute drug-induced psychosis, heavily multiplied by a crazy adrenaline shock and an off-the-charts pulse, wide open asphalt roads are directly, on an animal subconscious level, associated with cars, and cars mean inevitable mobility, superiority, and the enormous speed of his imaginary pursuers, the Bulgarian mafia killers, while a solid, high fence seems to his inflamed, delirious brain a reliable barricade, a saving, insurmountable physical barrier that will be able to delay the imaginary assassins for at least a couple of seconds, cut off their path in cars, and give him a chance to survive. Having overcome this barbed enclosure, jumping onto the loose, dusty ground on the other side and miraculously avoiding critical, stopping bleedings, Lars found himself at the very edge of a gigantic, endless agricultural field of sunflowers, which in the middle of a hot Bulgarian summer reaches human height, forming a dense, impenetrable yellow-green wall. And it was right there, into this thick vegetable sea, that he desperately dove headlong, disappearing forever from the sight of camera lenses, confused police, and the rest of civilized humanity. For his broken, exhausted mind, this stuffy, insect-infested field represented a perfect natural hideout, a flawless optical camouflage where he could lay low, blend in with the mottled landscape, securely hide from the sniper scopes of invented enemies, and catch his ragged breath for at least a brief moment. But the cruelest, most ruthless irony of this tragedy is that right behind this seemingly saving sunflower field began a dense, wild, unfamiliar forest belt and a high-speed, busy A2 highway leading into an irrevocable, gaping void. As soon as Sandra Mittank, being in Germany, realized that her son had not gotten in touch and had not boarded the saving plane, she immediately sounded the alarm, begging law enforcement agencies to start a rescue operation. You might reasonably ask why the police didn't rush to comb the fields that very second. The reason lies in the cold, ruthless, and indifferent state bureaucracy. By law, Lars was an adult, legally competent man. He was not under arrest. No obvious violent crime documented on camera had been committed against him. He simply ran away voluntarily on his own 2 feet from the airport territory, leaving his personal belongings behind, which from a dry legal point of view is his personal, albeit extremely strange, but lawful right. So the large-scale active phase of searches involving serious resources began only after several critically important, irretrievably lost days. When this cumbersome machine finally creaked into motion, drones with expensive thermal imagers took to the sky. Hundreds of volunteers chained together combed every square meter of that very field, and professional dog handlers put the best trained bloodhounds on Lars's trail. But even search dogs with their phenomenal sense of smell proved powerless due to the ruthless summer physics. The scorching 30-degree Bulgarian heat, the baking dry earth, and the constantly blowing dry wind completely evaporated and destroyed the faintest organic human scent trail in literally a couple of days, turning canine searches into a blind, meaningless wandering across a huge territory. Having found not a single shred of a yellow t-shirt, not a drop of blood on the branches, nor, most importantly, human remains, the investigators, having forever discarded any anti-scientific mysticism about kidnappings, put forward 2 strictly severe, realistic versions of how a person could disappear without a trace in the middle of densely populated Europe. The first, most tragic but ironclad medically sound theory is that Lars's exhausted body, which had not slept for several hard days, working at extreme, grueling speeds under the influence of the most severe drug psychosis and a continuous toxic injection of adrenaline, simply physically could not withstand the colossal overload under the scorching sun. Having run through the field, he could have gone deeper into the wild forest belt in blind panic, where he suffered a massive heart attack or a fatal heat stroke. Or he fell into some deep crevice hidden by thick, thorny bushes or an abandoned drainage well, where search parties simply could not physically reach, and wild nature, time, and forest animals over several months did what they always do, forever hiding the evidence from human eyes. However, the second version, which still makes his miserable mother's heart beat with a faint, ghostly hope, sounds no less frightening. Experienced investigators suggest that Lars successfully crossed the sunflower field and came out onto the major high-speed A2 highway, where, being in a state of the deepest dissociative fugue, a severe, defensive psychiatric disorder in which a person, due to unbearable stress, completely erases their identity and forgets who they are. He simply climbed into the back of a passing cargo truck or caught a random car. On the transit routes of Eastern Europe, drivers often break the rules and give rides to such strange, disheveled passengers without luggage, illegal migrants, or vagrants for minor cash or help in unloading goods, without asking any unnecessary questions, let alone demanding to see a German passport. So Lars Mittank, completely deprived of memory, documents, and his prosperous past, could easily cross several invisible state borders and end up on the dirty streets of any European metropolis, joining the multi-million, faceless army of the homeless, whom no one ever looks for or identifies from crime news photos. His mother, Sandra, spent all her life savings, hired the best, most expensive private detectives, regularly appeared on national television with tears in her eyes, and created a huge non-profit organization to search for her son. But over all these long years, not a single one of the hundreds of reports from random witnesses allegedly seeing a similar vagabond in different parts of the world from Canada to Brazil was ever confirmed after a strict DNA check. This creepy story, this bleeding, gaping hole in the archives, is not just another detective tale for entertainment. It is a heavy, blood-curdling warning for all of us about how incredibly fragile, defenseless, and vulnerable our human psyche is. How a single pill of an unfortunate antibiotic, one wrong logical step, and one ridiculous, senseless fight in a bar over football can in a few days forever erase a prosperous, smart, healthy person from the face of the earth, turning him into an eternal urban legend. And before we forever close this frightening, unresolved folder, I want to ask you one last, the most difficult, the heaviest, and most philosophical question. A detailed answer to which I will be waiting for in the comments right below this video. Do you think that if Lars is still miraculously alive and is really wandering right now somewhere along the cold streets of Europe with his memory completely wiped, sincerely believing in his new fictional identity of a homeless tramp, should the police even try to forcibly return him to his past life, risking irreparably breaking his traumatized psyche once again? Or is it sometimes better to let a person go forever, allowing them to stay where their own demons led them? I await your deep reflections in the comments. We are afraid of maniacs, catastrophes, and dark alleys. But Lars's story proves the most terrible enemy wakes up when you swallow an ordinary pill and are left alone with your own mind. The folder is closed. Subscribe to Raccoon Archives. Here we remember those whom the system would like to forget.